Okay, coaches, we'll make a start. Firstly, as always, very appreciative to the presenters for jumping on. Both Paul Flynn from Melbourne Boomers and Nunawading Basketball, and also Coach James Janssen from Davidson Women's Basketball over in the States. It's very early over there. Coach has done well to get up and get in the office, so we appreciate his time. First up is Paul Flynn. Extensive resume, obviously very solid player, but also as a coach, 3 national championships with the Vic under-18 women, and has then transitioned into senior basketball with Nunawading, the NBL 1 women, and obviously now extensive experience with the Melbourne Boomers as the assistant coach there. So looking forward to your presentation, Coach, and I'll pass over to you now.
Cool. Thanks very much for that, Reece. Thank you very much for having me. I think first and foremost, before I really kick off, just want to commend yourself and your team at Wyndham for putting on these online coaching clinics during the isolation period. It's been a fantastic opportunity for coaches, young and old, to jump on and learn new things and reinforce maybe some of the things that they've been teaching for a lot of time. So, really appreciate and commend the work that you guys and your team have done out there to allow this platform. A little bit about what I'm going to talk about tonight, guys, and I'll jump on and share my screen in a short second. Reece reached out to me a couple of weeks ago. It was probably more so on the back of one of the most watched documentaries in sports history, or in recent times at least, with The Last Dance. The Last Dance probably emphasised or brought back into the discussion the triangle offence, and as Reece said, coaching Vic Metro and having some good success with them over a number of years, I actually adopted the triangle offence for those campaigns. With it being a little not redundant, but I suppose out of vogue at the moment, what I've done is rather than give you a complete clinic on what the triangle offence is, I thought I'd go sort of a little bit behind the scenes and talk about the 7 principles of sound offence that the triangle offence is built on, that Tex Winter and Phil Jackson coined, but also these principles of sound offence are something that you can apply to pretty much any offensive system that you put in place. So I'll just jump in and share my screen for you. So hopefully that'll come up now. Hopefully you can see that on your screens. Let me know if you can't. So 7 principles of sound offence. Before I really get stuck into that, I probably wanted to preface everything that I say in today's or in tonight's discussion is you can have all the systems in the world. You can have the best system in your league or in your conference. But 2 things that I value highly as a coach and really build my teams on is that you need to promote both talent and character. And you need to be able to build genuine connections through constant communication with your players. Now, if you can do those things, then pretty much whatever you put in place, your playing group buy into and give you 100%. If you don't promote talent and character, and you don't have that genuine connection with your players, then you're going to face a lot more hurdles in front of you as the season goes on, particularly when you're in league play and you've got a week in, week out grind over a period of time. So they're just 2 things I wanted to preface this presentation with, just as things that I highly value and think that every coach should really not just look at the players that are extremely talented, but also the ones that have the character traits that are going to help you succeed as a team. So I started coaching in 2008. I was still playing. It was the back end of my Siebel career, but I decided I wanted to sort of dip my toe in the water with coaching. So at Nunawading, I took on an under-16 3 boys side. The head coach of the age group at that time was Graham Hunt, who's sadly no longer with us. But he was really generous with his time and his advice. He was involved in BV's high performance programs quite a lot. And just one of the first pieces of advice that he gave to me when I decided that I was going to pick up a whiteboard and start working with a group of players is that whatever you decide to run, he said, you've got to know it inside and out. He said, under 16 boys will pick you apart if you hesitate on what you're doing. So go with something that you know, and go with something that you're confident that you'll be able to coach, deliver, and answer questions on. Obviously, there are times where you need to adapt on the fly, but the more you know about it, the better, the more success, the more traction that you're going to get with your players. So with that, as with most people my age, when I got into basketball, the Chicago Bulls were all the rage. They were obviously an absolute powerhouse in the NBA. So that's where I sort of fell in love with the game of basketball, was growing up watching the Bulls. I can remember racing to get the Sunday paper and beat my sisters to it, so I could cut out the pictures of the Bulls players that would get some coverage in the Herald Sun. And then later on, when I got an opportunity to play or wave a towel on the bench in the NBL with the Victoria Giants, we adopted the triangle offense and basically built it on the same principles as what the Chicago Bulls had. And then again, towards the end of my playing career in the SEABL with Nunawading, Craig Simpson came in for my last season and a half, and we adopted the triangle offense there. So it was a fairly influential, I suppose, offensive system in my upbringing as a basketball player. And it made sense for me to sort of, I suppose, dive in with that as the system that I was going to adopt, knowing that I probably had more knowledge of that system than anything else at that particular time. I'll just fix up my mouse here. It's decided to go a little bit flat. 2 seconds. So the 7 principles of sound offense. When I did take on an under 16 boys team, I was lucky enough that my team manager at the time was a coach by the name of Tim Cutler. He was very experienced in generations before myself in coaching. His son was in my team at that stage, so he jumped on board and was a really good support for me as my team manager. And he gave me a book which basically broke down the theories of Phil Jackson and Tex Winter and their principles behind their offensive system. So basically, that's the first coaching book that I dived into. And since then, these 7 principles of sound offense have really served me well. Whether it be running the triangle or more recently in other offensive systems, I find that it applies across pretty much any offensive system that you want to run. So 7 principles of sound offense, 1 being penetration, 2 spacing, 3 ball and player movement, options for the ball handler, offensive rebounding and defensive balance, versatile positioning, and use of individual talents. And those points are things that have probably had a constantly evolving meaning for me as I gain more experience in the coaching industry and develop my own craft, and obviously get to have conversations with coaches that have far more experience and knowledge than myself. These principles take on not a new meaning, but probably extended meaning as we go along. And they're obviously things that you develop yourself as a coach as you go. So another thing that Phil Jackson sort of said, basketball is a simple game. Your goal is penetration, get the ball close to the basket, and there are 3 ways to do that: pass, dribble, and offensive rebound. I added in a 4th one. I think you can create penetration by cutting, and that's obviously principle number 1. So dribble penetration, pass penetration, cut penetration. The best way is obviously to get to the rim. Before any game that I'm involved in, I have the first point I put on my whiteboard is that we need to have pressure on the rim. And I think there's a couple of coaches that are on here. I think I saw Nathan Danson here before on the call before. He'll attest that I generally have pressure on the rim, pressure on the rim, pressure on the rim is my first point. We need to get 2 feet in the paint as much as possible. Now, it can be via a one-on-one attack. It can be through 2-man game secondary actions. In the triangle offense, pinch post is a really good way of getting 2 feet in the paint for somebody coming off a handoff. Pick and roll setups, which for anyone who tuned in last week with Coach O'Loughlin up in Cairns, he went over, pick and roll setups. That can be out of the middle, out of side pick and rolls. The only thing that we try and avoid in triangle, I suppose, is putting any pick and rolls in the deep corners, just to avoid getting those traps happening. Now, just a couple of quick shots here. Hopefully you can see some video come up on your screen. If you can't, let me know. Obvious example here of some dribble penetration. Now, you'd think that would make sense in itself, but this will all tie in with some of the other principles that we put up. We clear out the floor here. Now, in an ideal scenario, I would switch Marina, who's about to set the on-ball screen, with Jackie, who's on the weak side here. But a relatively good setup based on how Melbourne were defending. Okay, our point guard gets 2 feet in the paint. I would prefer that that Jackie here hadn't cut in and she kept spacing out on the floor, on the perimeter here, and that the dive comes from the screener instead. But you can see on dribble penetration here, Vanessa's caused a good collapse of the defense and is able to find shooters on the perimeter to get shots up. So again, dribble penetration is obviously a way to put some pressure on the D, force them to do some things that they don't want. Another example here, and it's probably not the most obvious example of the 4 ways that you can penetrate, but cut penetration. We get a good post entry. Okay, Vanessa, our point guard, gets a great cut here. In an ideal world, I'd like the big to hand the ball off to Vanessa there. It should get us a layup. In this instance, that doesn't happen. Okay, but Vanessa also, the point guard, then draws the big off to Sag. So again, I'd almost like our big to be able to square up nice and strong and pop that little jump shot in. It doesn't happen in this example, but again, we're just forcing the defense to rotate, okay, a little bit more than what they'd like, and it's all happened fairly early in the offense. Get that one back down. The other thing, or the other option is for penetration is offensive rebound. Sometimes teams do a really good job defensively, particularly when you get scouted quite a bit. Sometimes they take away your dribble penetration options, or they make it really difficult. They're bumping cutters, they're fronting posts. Obviously, the examples that I just gave you there on the video, we do a good job of getting the ball in the post, but they defended that a little bit differently and got round it. It can sometimes be a bit more difficult to get that ball in. So the other way is to offensive rebound. Sometimes the most effective way you can actually penetrate is to shoot the ball and have players in really good rebounding positions. So I find whenever we have defensive schemes that full front us or are trying to get, 3/4 of the way around, hand round, we get the ball up as quickly as possible, knowing that our bigs are generally in a pretty good box out position. And that gets us to the rim. The other thing that I came across a little while ago in terms of penetration is the 4 offensive decisions that you can make. I got this off a basketball immersion podcast and dug a little bit deeper into it. But prior to a catch, okay, your decision process is basically, if you've got more than an arm's length advantage, okay, we want you to be confident in shooting the ball. If it's less than an arm's length advantage, okay, your decision process is to pass or drive. Okay, if you're driving, you've got to drive to score. In any offense that we put in, it's pretty clear from day one when I put into my players, I'm like, the offense is there as a framework for us, but at any stage you have full full reign to break the offence. But if you are going to break the offence, you must get feet in the paint. You must be driving to score. You may not be the end result, okay, but you're obviously going to force a defensive rotation. So driving the score, okay, when you get shoulder to chest advantage, you score it. Okay, when it's chest to chest advantage, you need to make sure that you've got some counter moves ready to go. Offensive spacing. Spacing is offense. I think most people probably would have heard that quote along their journey as coaches at some point. Offensive spacing has been drilled into me as being the most important detail. It's often been, particularly when I was running the triangle with big metro teams, a topic of fairly significant debate. With spacing for me and in the triangle system, I have my players about 4.5 to 5 meters apart, which you can see in the middle diagram here. So it's got the American measurements there in terms of 15, 18, 20 feet. For us in metrics, we're talking 4.5 to 5 meters apart. Basically, we want to stretch the floor as much as we possibly can. Make it difficult to defend. Force long rotations, force long, laborious closeouts. Make it really hard for players to get their hand out onto the shot. If they close out, they're closing out long, they're closing out off balance, and we're able to put the ball to the floor and get to the rim. Great spacing exposes defensive vulnerabilities. Okay, you want to try most times make the defense feel like they're on an island all by themselves, that the help's never coming. And that's something that's been reinforced in a lot of discussions that we have. So the spacing that I've got here is after the first pass is made in the triangle and we fill the corner. My wing players are generally a little bit higher than normal. When I grew up, our wing players were foul line extended, so they were down here a little bit more. I try and draw it up a little bit higher, 3-point line extended, maybe half a step inside from 3-point line extended. We're not often shooting the ball off that first pass. I find that when we intentionally come out that little bit higher, we're not getting passes deflected, we're not getting denied quite as hard, and it gives us really good options out of there. To get to that point though, and I'll go over back to diagram 1 here, we have what's called the line of truth, and that's just to help a decision process for our point guard. The line of truth here is probably about 1 meter inside the halfway line. For my system, I just use the halfway line as my sort of example point. I try and get my point guards to release the ball before the halfway line. So if they can kick the ball ahead to their strong side wing and initiate their offensive spacing as they cross the half or before they cross the half, we're in pretty good shape. If they have to dribble across the halfway line, we generally go into a lag pass back to the trail and change sides of the floor, or we can go into a dribble penetration and then start setting up our spacing from there. The other diagram I have over here on the right is just to help with our spacing with our wings. Again, 3-point line extendeds where I generally have them, but basically we have what's called a line of deployment here, and it's a direct line where you pop your post player in between the basket and the wing player that has the ball. Again, our keyways are a little bit wider now than are on this diagram, so my post is probably half a step out further than that. And what I've been working on a lot lately is rather than having my post player post up back to basket, I have them posting up back to baseline. They can just get a stronger armbar and space away from the defender. It also allows them greater floor vision. And in the triangle particularly, the post player is far more of a facilitator than an immediate threat, particularly if they're outside the lane. So it gives them better court vision, but it also allows them to face up and play, face to basket rather than back to basket. I'm finding it's becoming a lot harder to have players that have a natural back to basket ability or preference, and they all prefer to face up, and I'm okay with that. So just to sort of aid them with that, I get my post players starting with their bum to baseline instead. I came across this quote recently. So manager of Manchester City, changing codes a little bit here, but we do not pass to move the ball. We pass to move the opposition, and that's something that really resonated with me. Again, good spacing with really good ball movement. Okay, your idea is to shift the defense out of the way as much as possible, and obviously create gaps and lanes for you to attack. So it's a little bit like chess. You want to shift your opponent into a position of vulnerability, and you want to be able to shift the ball as quickly as possible. Now, the average chess pass moves at about 50 kilometers an hour. So if you've got good spacing and you're moving the ball, it's 5 meters at 50 k's an hour, you're shifting the ball around. Every pass is taking about 0.3 of a second, which is a hell of a lot faster than any of my players can dribble the ball, and a hell of a lot faster than any of my players can make a cut. So passing is a really good weapon for us there. Ball and play movement. So players like the ball must move with purpose. We think that effective ball activity is essential. If we're not moving off the ball, then 80% of our offense is spectating. It's something that I find the game is evolving with quite rapidly. Obviously, we see in European leagues, we see in FIBA basketball, and even in the NBA now, it's far more celebrated. It was sort of like the laborious part of an offensive system a while ago, whereas now we're seeing highlight videos of the Spurs back in 2015, of the Warriors and the way that they're moving the ball, the way that players are moving off the ball to get players open. I know at Boomers, Guy speaks a lot about how much movement Steph Curry has off the ball to create the shots that he gets, knowing that the offense generally starts with the ball in his hand, but it hits another 3 people before it comes back to him before a shot. So ball and play and movement is really important. Off-ball movement, so screening actions, cutting actions, good spacing, and having that half-second decision time to be able to decide whether you're putting the ball to the floor and making a move, or whether you're getting it on. It's not necessarily that you're releasing the ball in half a second, but you need to know what you're doing in that 0.5 of a second. And again, we have a number of drills at the Boomers that are coined after, we call them Spurs drills. And it's catching the ball and making a really quick decision on whether that's going to the floor, whether it's going up as a shot, or whether we're kicking it on. Got a couple of quick videos here just on ball and player movement. Again, they don't need to be complex movements. It's just something to shift the defense out of your way. So in this instance here, we've just made that wing entry pass. What I want to look at is, if I just take it back just a fraction, is just a simple exchange on the weak side of the floor is enough to engage the defense off the split line rotation. Which then allows our guard an easy layup under the hoop, because there's just no help line coming across to stop that. Again, it doesn't need to be a complex series of actions. It just needs to be something simple and effective that draws the defense's attention away. Again, here, really good post entry. Probably make the post chase it a little bit too much there, but enough. They go to double down. We go into a simple onside screening action. Okay, confuse the defense, and then gets what I would coin a fairly easy and high percentage shot. We make it look a little bit tougher in that example than what we should. So again, doesn't need to be a complex series of actions. Okay, it can be something pretty simple, but ball and player movement's really important to make sure that we keep the ball going. Just really quickly, and this is something something I put in more so with my junior Vic Metro sides than I emphasise with seniors at NBL 1 level or WNBL. Doesn't mean that it's any less important for them. There's still things that need to be looked after, but our passing principles, passing is probably one of the forgotten fundamentals. We're generally really quick to look at the turnover column on a stat sheet at halftime or at full time as coaches, but we don't dedicate a whole lot of time necessarily at practice or in our practice plan to fix it. So just to cover a few things that I put in place and we focus on, particularly early days with those Vic Metro sides, is one, pass when the defender's at 90 centimetres, 3 feet from the ball or closer. Obviously, the closer the defender is, they need to make a quicker decision. If they're standing off, they get a little bit more time to make a decision and deflect passes. See passing lanes. Make sure that the receiver's not standing still, making sure that we're using peripheral vision without making blind passes. Use fakes with a purpose, and I think this is definitely something that we don't do enough. The use of a good pass fake is a great way to shift the defense and keep the ball on a strong side of the floor. Particularly useful, I've found, going against zone defenses. We want to eliminate all unnecessary movements. So quick wrist action shortens the action of the pass. Pass quickly. Again, we're talking about that 0.5 of a second to make a decision. At VJBL level, I've found that you've generally got about 3 seconds after receiving the ball to make a play. The quicker that you can make the defense react, the better play you're likely to make. Pass the ball to your teammates' open side. It sounds like a simple concept and something that would come naturally, but definitely something that needs to get re-emphasised on a fairly regular occurrence. And anticipate receiving the ball. Okay, think but don't act. Okay, before you receive it, have some vision about what's going on ahead. Again, they all seem pretty simple, but things that you need to throw into practice plans and your dialogue with players just to try and keep that turnover column as low as you possibly can. Having only one option is not an option. I think that's a fairly self-explanatory one. Options for the ball handler are really important. The ball handler must be able to pass to any of their four teammates at any given time. The more options players have to attack a defender, the more successful that player will be. And I think this one ties in fairly closely with the first 3 principles, being penetration, spacing, and movement. Obviously, the more options that ball handler has, the better your offensive system's going to be. Next one here. Okay, so we're looking at some of the options that we get out of triangle, and I'm not going to try and run you through it all with a pointer on diagrams. I have some video here, but basically the setup here in the triangle, the first one here is our post entry. Now, my decision process with post entry here, once we enter it in, if the post player has 2 feet inside the paint, everybody holds their spacing and allows the big to go to work. They've done a job, they've got a seal inside the paint, and we want to reward them by having an offensive mindset. Okay, but if one or both feet are outside the paint, then they automatically become a facilitator first. The post player has to allow cuts to occur. We generally have a baseline cutter first and a speed cut through the middle, or a Laker cut, and a series of actions after that. They need to allow those cuts to happen. If nothing comes of those cuts, then by all means the post can then go to work there. Second diagram here is when we enter it through what's called the pinch post or the high post. It's a quick flash there by the 4. That initiates a 2-man game. It can initiate into some dribble handoff action. It's a really good option for a high-low, and I think I've got some video that emphasises the high-low. Then the third diagram over here is our corner entry. It's generally our least preferenced entry, just purely because we don't want to encourage corner traps. But essentially what goes in there, we kick it down to the corner. The wing will then shallow cut through to the opposite side, and then the 5 will go into an on-ball scenario with the player in the corner. The only difference being that it's not a headhunted screen. I generally get the 5 to take 1 or 2 steps off the elbow, and then it's up to the ball handler to go to work. I'll pull up a few video clips just to give you some examples here. So the first one here, so this is from my 2016 Vic Metro squad. It was one of our unbelievably talented squads. There's a number of WNBL caliber players here, players that have gone on to represent Australia. So fortunate with talent in this group. So you see that line of deployment that we spoke about a little bit earlier. It's a great entry pass by Kira Rowe. Okay, ball goes to the side of the post player away from the defender. We have a good baseline cut. Okay, leg cut through the elbow. And then a good flash by Maddie Pulai there. Now, the way that I've evolved our offense off of this one, and it's something that we did with Boomers a little bit this year, is say we had Kayla George receive it down in the post, and we had Lindsay Allen, Maddie Garrick making a cut where Monique Conti is here. So we actually put this post player, I got them to put the ball to the floor and go into a dribble handoff with the guard. It's an effective screening action. It also draws the post defender a little bit higher off that block and gets the guard a good little layup at the rim there. But not too displeased with Maddie Pulai getting that jumper just above the elbow. Again, we're looking at a post entry here. Okay, so I think that goes to Georgia Pino in the post, who's a bit of an undersized post for us. We get our speed cuts, a drop pass there and an easy layup. All with action on the opposite side of the floor. Okay, we're into a pinch post entry here. So that second diagram I showed you. So we're going to see a flash from the weak side post player. For this instance, we've gone through the top. And my floor spacing here, as you can see, Kira Rowe's actually quite high. For some people, some coaches sort of debate with me about what's the purpose. They're out of the play, but what it's done there is it's made Sammy Simons, the defender for SA Metro here, make a decision. Is she going to sag in and try and stop the pass into Lucy Cochran? If she does, it's an easy pass to Kira. If she gets dragged all the way out to guard Kira out here, then obviously it's a much easier and direct pass straight into Lucy Cochran there. But creates a little bit of movement. She goes under the screen. We get a good 3-point shot out of that. Okay, so in this instance here, Ella Badish grabs it in that pinch post, and we look high-low to Ezzy Magvega down low. Obviously, we want to take advantage of Ezzy's incredible athleticism. She's got a length advantage over her opponents there, but we can deliver the ball nice and easily. And I think we end up making a little bit of a tougher shot out of this than what we needed to, but we still got 2 points at the end of it, which was good. And if I'm thinking correctly, we go into the pinch post again here, but then we go into a dribble handoff action. So we allow the first cutter, which is Cara Dasari, to go off, drag some defense with her. We've got some off-ball action down in the corner, so it's just screen down or an exchange in that weak side. And then Ellie goes into a dribble handoff for Kira. Now, we'd like Kira to turn the corner a little bit sharper and get to the rim in one fluent motion, but she gets there in the end. We've got one more pinch post entry here. And basically this gets us into an example of where we can turn it into a pick and roll. Great kickback and a Reece screen here. Putting their 4-man into 2 pick and roll actions. And obviously get to the rim there. Last couple of examples I've got here. So corner entry. So these are the ones that we sort of preference last. It goes down nice and low. As I said, we obviously don't want to set screens too deep here. We don't want to get trapped in the corner. So the point guard clears through, And then, there's 2 steps off the elbow and the ball handler's responsibility to attack in. Now, where this has some actions that we see that are a little bit more prevalent in today's game, we got, I suppose, some semi-floppy action on the weak side here. If we kick that out to a shooter, we could almost run it into some hammer action on the second side of the floor if the defense does a reasonably good job of cutting off the first options for us. Okay, reject the screen, go baseline, forces the help. Okay, New South Country had done a pretty good job of scouting that if the helper went, they need to dive down on Ezzy here and stop the dump down. Okay, but again, good spacing, good court vision. Okay, you find shooters on the perimeter. And again, really lucky that these girls bought into the process. It was a bit of a shortened period with these girls because we had 4 based at the AIS before we went away. So we got about 2 training sessions as a full squad. Rebounding wins championships. You need to emphasise it and work with your kids on it. That's a quote from Pat Summitt, obviously very successful coach out of Tennessee, huge over in the States. Again, rebounding is something that I think we emphasise as coaches, but we probably don't dedicate enough time at practice to it. It's just one of those things that sort of goes down our practice list when really given the emphasis that we put on it at practice, it needs to be right up there. So offensive rebounding and defensive balance. And I won't talk too much on the defensive balance side of things because every coach has their preferences on whether they're sending 2, 3, 4, 5 to the boards. There's some really good stuff from Aaron Fern out at the moment where he tags and sends 5 to the glass. But just really quickly, because I know I'm talking quite a lot, got into a conversation with our Nunawading Spectres NBL 1 men's head coach and head coach of the Australian 3-on-3 team, Dave Beaver. He's a former teammate of mine and really lucky that we run our practices next to each other these days. But got into a bit of discussion with him about rebounding. And he said, rebounding is a 2-part process. It's a 2-part skill. Now, generally, coaches will teach the first part, and that's the box out. When we're doing rebounding drills, we emphasize what the box out is. We don't tend to emphasize the second part, which is you need to actually teach your players to go get the ball. It's an assumed part of the skill, but it's generally not emphasized by the coaches. It's generally what you hear from, the parents and the spectators on the sideline where they're yelling out, go and get it. But it's, again, something that we tried to focus a little bit more on at Boomers this year, is that both parts of that process is making sure that we get the box out right, but then don't be heavy and hold for too long. You actually need to go and chase that down. And as we said right back at the start, offensive rebounding is a really good way to penetrate the defense. Versatile positioning, the Euro effect for me, it's one of the things that's been the most exciting evolution of basketball in recent years is seeing, your 6'10", 6'11", 7-foot players being able to step out and play on the perimeter. For me, an offensive wish list as a coach is you want to have all players with an ability to shoot, be competent shooters from the perimeter. We know they're not all going to be lights out, but we invest some time to make our players competent perimeter shooters. We'd love most of our players to be able to penetrate off the dribble, use pick and roll actions, or at least be involved in them as a screener, and obviously facilitate for others. But versatile positioning, having players that can understand any position on the floor within your offensive system, obviously makes the game a lot easier to coach because nothing's perfect in a game of basketball. You can come down and find that you've been scrambled a little bit. So if you can fall into your spacing and alignments with players out of position as such, it's a lot easier and obviously a lot harder for teams to scout that when your 5-man's popping out onto the perimeter. And then use of individual talents. And this is something that has been something for me, a great learning curve, in addition to what we do at senior level is obviously I'm blessed to coach and work with a lot of very talented players, and you don't want to stifle what you actually bring them into the team for. there's no point recruiting someone because, you know, they're great out of pick and rolls and you have an offensive system that never actually puts them into that setup. So, I think just having an offensive system or segments of your offensive system that allows players to be a little bit more creative, a little less proficient in doing, you know, A, B, C, and creative in being able to go A, B, and then create out of X is really, really important. So for me, I know I've been talking quite a bit, but I suppose, you know, the early influences for me have been triangle, whether that be watching basketball as a young kid, going into an NBL setup, playing it at senior level. It's definitely something that I adopted as a coach. But I think as I'm taking on some different systems, these 7 principles of sound offense are something that I've, you know, regardless of what I'm running, they're principles that are serving me well.
Fantastic stuff, mate. I'll just stop your screen. Flinny, thanks so much for that. That was really good detail, and like you said, obviously picked out some stuff from Triangle, and it's timely, as you say. Might be making a comeback. Everyone in VJBL will be running it next year. So, but I think, like you said, more importantly, it's those principles that could fit any system, whether it was flow, shuffle, whatever. I think that's great. There's a few questions I'll get the coaches to ask. So first up, if Al McCautry, if you're happy to ask your question.
Hey, Paulie. Mate, just over the journey, whether it's VJBL juniors, state program or seniors, how have you balanced? Because sometimes not every offense is an equal opportunity offense. So how have you balanced with the last part of your presentation about having players who have got more talent than possibly some others? Yep. How have you balanced or what hurdles have you come up against where you've got one or two talented kids and others are playing a role? Can you just share your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, great question, Al. Look, it's a fine balance, and I think, you know, regardless of the talent levels of your team, it's something, or the players within your team, it's something that every team faces, and acceptance of roles within that team, and what skill set you bring in. You know, you want to be able to empower players to use their strengths as much as, you know, you're trying to, I suppose, limit an exposure of weaknesses. Pardon me. I suppose at junior level, particularly in the earlier years, I focused in under 16s as such. I focused more on, you know, proficiencies of spacing, proficiencies of cuts, and not so much but wasn't as forward in emphasising or encouraging the use of creativity. We went more on, right, well, this is the cutting action that we want, and we need you to speed cut through the Laker cut and get yourself through the elbow, draw a player with you. Whereas at senior level, it's more empowering them to use their creativity. They're players that have a far greater understanding of what their own ability is, and probably on the practice floor, giving them a far greater voice in terms of what the offense or what shape the offense takes and what options that you preference than anything else.
Excellent. Thanks, mate.
Thank you. Next up is Clayton Lyons.
Thanks, Reece. G'day, Paul. Mate, I ran the triangle offense last season of VJBL with my 14-4 boys.
Yep.
Bit of an experiment. We decided to run the same play on the strong side, on the weak side. So we just called a switch.
Yep.
And just mirrored what we did on each side, ran 3 or 4 plays, and we ran blind pig and blind post and the post entry with the Lakers cut.
Sure.
I've got 2 quick questions. One is, what was the book that you said earlier on your presentation was shared with you in regards to the offense?
The book that Tim Cutler gave me early on.
Yep. If you could share that with us afterwards, mate, that'd be great. I'd love to look at it and read it if that's possible.
Yep, no problem.
And the second thing is, I noticed in your offensive set, you had the two guard quite high.
Yep.
Almost on the split line.
Yep.
I ran my one and my twos off the seam.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed you've got the two guard quite high off the split line. Can you explain to us why you run that position so high in this set?
Yep, sure. So what I'll actually do is, I think the book I had, it was an NBA coach's playbook. I'm not 100% sure on its exact title, but what I'll actually do is I'm pretty sure I've got a scanned copy, an excerpt of the triangle section of it.
That'd be great, mate. Yeah.
I can try and scan that through and get it to Reece to distribute. In terms of the two guard really high, I put them there. So this is after the initial pass to the wing and the one's cut through to the corner. I have the two guard really high for a couple of reasons. One, it forces the defense to make a decision. Am I going to guard the pass back to the top? If they do that, I can make a direct pass into a pinch post flash. If I'm going to sag and cut out the pinch post, then I can get it to the top, and then I go straight into an immediate mid pick and roll setup.
Right.
I just find, and again, similar to the discussions, and I suppose the healthy debates that I've got into with coaches and mentors in the past about the spacing, is with my wing players being 3-point line extended as opposed to foul line extended. I just find it allows me to initiate my offense a little easier because the defense is less likely to deny me the whole way. If they do, I've got a clear back cut lane to the rim.
Yeah, so numbers 3-on-4, 4-on-3.
I'm just trying to spread the floor as much as possible. I find that the more we spread it, the bigger the gaps are to attack.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Next up, Mason Rogers.
Hey, thanks for that. I was just wondering, I guess, on first thought, you'd think if you have more players within the 3-point line that they clog up driving lanes. Did you find this was the case running it, or did you find the players were too cautious to help off considering their offensive counterpart was so close to the basket?
I mean, the whole purpose of the spacing in the first place is to try and get the defense to show their hand on what their priorities are. Is their priority as a defensive system, or the defensive rules they've put in place, to shut down our penetration game or to shut down our perimeter shooting game? Now, again, I'm lucky enough that with the players that I work with, particularly like at Boomers and at NBL 1 level, we have the ability to punish through whatever avenue they're not cutting off. But again, with the spacing, the more I pull them out, the easier it is to make those drives, because you get 2 or 3 passes into an offensive possession and they're not going to sag in too long. It's just natural tendency to sort of follow the ball out.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Cool, no worries.
Last one is from Claire Knight.
Hey, Paulie, how you doing?
Good, Claire. How are you?
Thank you for the nice chat today. So my question's more about, you're talking about emphasising the rebounding and stuff. Is there anything specific that you do in your training sessions, whether drill-wise, or is it more highlighting, the go-get type of mentality? Yep.
Again, 2-part process. So obviously you need players to box out, and in shorter segments, in broken down games, you can focus on both parts quite equally, and you can reward in a point system if you get a good box out, and reward more if they then get the rebound. I generally find, because my teams like to play a lot within training, and obviously that's the way I like to coach, we have a far more competitive and games approach to how we deliver our training sessions. We do games, so our scrimmages might only be to 3 baskets.
Yeah.
but anytime you get an offensive rebound, you reset the opposition.
Back to zero. Score back to zero.
Given it's only to 3, it's not too bad. But that was something that Rowan Short put in back when I was playing for him in Siebel. And game to 3 might take us 30 minutes because someone's going to go after that offensive board and reset your score just when you think you're going to win. And it just creates that level of competitiveness to get after the ball. And you can swing the entire flow of a game just with one offensive rebound. So that's how we do it in our games. Shorter or lower scores to win, but a higher reward for those that crash the O boards.
And then did you also find sort of conversely on that like defensive blocking out then sort of improved?
Yeah, absolutely. Players do everything they can to just try and keep their player outside the paint.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. I like that one.
Thanks for the questions, coaches. There was a couple we won't get to just because cognizant of time and moving into Coach Janssen's presentation. But just again, Flinny, thanks so much. The detail, the time that went into that clearly was immense. So thank you so much for that.
No worries. Thank you very much. If anyone does have a follow-up question, I know Reece has obviously tagged me on Twitter and that sort of stuff. Feel free to reach out. I'm working from home. I'm more than happy to talk hoops.
It's about to ramp up, mate. I can imagine you're going to be a busy man. So, no, thank you so much. We'll now move into the second presentation. Coach James Janssen, Davidson College women's basketball assistant coach. Previously involved with Wake Forest, but he's an Australian. He's from Blackburn Vikings Basketball Club originally in the VJBL. So he's blazing a trail over there in the US and looking forward to his presentation on the Davidson women's basketball offense and style of play.
Yeah, thanks, Reece. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to join in and get to kind of talk a little basketball. But I guess just to start off, I kind of was reflecting a little bit, and Reece kind of ran us up against the opening night of the AFL season or return of the AFL season, and that kind of got me thinking. And I'm gonna share my screen real quick with you guys. Alrighty, and took me back to 2011, and here we are, kind of a Big V championship that. And you've got Callum Brown and Tyler Brown in that photo just there who are playing tonight for Collingwood. So I appreciate you guys joining in as Collingwood play Richmond, but hopefully we can share a little bit and once again, happy to answer any questions we've got as we go. So as Reece mentioned, my kind of background, I'm from Melbourne, spent kind of 2003 to 2012 involved with the Blackburn Vikings club. Kind of playing and coaching, coached a range of levels, range of age groups, ran a bunch of camps, all that kind of stuff as well. And in 2012, I came across here to Wake Forest University and joined their program, the women's program, as kind of a graduate assistant, a volunteer assistant, and was there for 5 years. And was fortunate enough 3 years ago that one of the assistants that I worked with at Wake got the head coaching job at Davidson, and she brought me along. So I've been doing this now kind of full-time at Davidson for 3 years. Been an absolute blessing, really, really enjoying it. We got a kind of bunch of Aussies now, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. And then just a little side note, kind of my academic background, to go to Deakin University and kind of an exercise sports science background with that too. So kind of some objectives just for kind of what I want to get through today in some way. First piece is just I kind of want to give you guys just an example of how kind of our women's college basketball program constructed our offensive system. And I think just to kind of point the picture of that is that, like, this is women's college basketball, so very different to what goes on with the men's stuff. And I want it to be like an example in that obviously you don't have to adopt all these things, but this is how we went about thinking about how to approach our offensive basketball game plan. Going to kind of discuss just the context of college basketball first with regards to what that looks like. going to kind of communicate our intended style of play. We'll show examples of kind of what I consider the end game, and then I'll expand on our version of what some people would consider kind of flow offense, or kind of our tweaks to that setup. And happy to answer any questions as we go. Reece, if there's stuff that kind of pops up as I'm rolling through that you feel pertinent, feel free to ask me as we go. It doesn't have to be all at the end. All right, so context of college basketball, just so you guys fully understand. Some people may have more or less familiarity with it, but as a general guide, we're going to have 13 players in our roster across 4 classes, so aging anywhere from 18 to 22 years old. This means that most commonly we've got players for 4 years. So when we're constructing a system, something where we're able to repeat and build from that year to year, and someone gets better as they spend time, is really important. And that plays into the play development piece as well, in that we can then tailor the skills that we want to work on with our kids and tailor that development towards what this system looks like. Yearly calendar, so our practices start around, kids return to campus around August, and full practices begin kind of end of September. We're then in kind of a pretty heavy preseason mode until November. Games start in November. We play 30 games between the start of November and the end of February, and then kind of March Madness hits. We got that piece. So we're looking at a pretty intense 6 to 8 month period, with 4 months over the summer off. At Davidson, the way that it looks is we practice pretty much every day at 4:45. So that's kind of that piece. This is not kind of a scenario where we'll practice once a week or twice a week like some of you guys may have to. And then we got obviously great access to facilities, and we also have practice players. So embedded in this, we're able to practice against kind of male students on campus, a bunch of other stuff, and we are very blessed with our resources. So just wanted to give you that concept as you understand kind of where we're coming from with this. Just to give you a visual, here's our practice facility. We have access to that 24/7. So it does give us a fair bit of flexibility, whether it's play development piece or within our practices of what we do. Our men have a similar practice facility directly next door. So in terms of our brand for our kind of our game style here at Davidson, when we got here, we wanted something that was relatively sticky and really kind of summarized how we think about basketball. And we felt that kind of the share, shoot, stifle mentality was something that we wanted to kind of lock in on. And just for some context, when we got the job here, the team had come off a 6-24 season. They'd recently moved to the Atlantic 10 Conference, which is a much more national-based conference, pretty highly regarded. And they'd struggled with that transition a little bit. And we came in having to kind of turn that around a little bit. So we're going to talk about the offensive piece today. Now, when we came in offensively, they were at the bottom of the barrel. So within our conference, they were last in points per game, really low in all the efficiency numbers. And they were actually the second worst team in the entire country at three-point shooting, which for Steph Curry College, we feel like is a bit of an indictment. So we wanted to turn those things around. And in implementing our system, obviously you're inheriting some players. There's those pieces to things. But within a span of 2 years, we're able to turn us from being the worst offensive team to actually leading the conference in offensive production by year 2. And in conjunction with that, we also broke the school record in 3 points made, moved ourselves up towards kind of the top 100. So 351 Division I colleges. We were sitting 350 before we got here. Within the span of 2 years, with very similar players, and we're able to move things in a kind of the top 100. So that's kind of just a little bit of background on that piece. So one thing I want to talk about a little bit, and here's kind of some hieroglyphics on the screen, but as part of what we do, we feel that the language is really, really important. We feel that a kind of a secret code or some elements of common language is just super important for the buy-in component, for your ability to communicate with people, and have efficiency with how we approach things. So everything you're probably going to see, you're going to have different names to what you call them. I'll try to translate in some ways. But when we're thinking about language, a lot of our locations on the floor are named different things. And then the other piece to that as well is we try to use verbs with our language as much as possible. So if it's position on the floor that we can use verbs, whether it's actions, that really helps, we believe, with kind of the stickiness of things. So in terms of offensive fundamentals, we kind of have the overall mission that we want to be the best team in our conference at what we would call loosely playing basketball. And kind of what that means is we want to function at a very, very high level in the play after the play. So obviously you can have any offense you want, but at some point it gets to the component where you have an advantage or something like that goes on. We want to excel at that piece in making decisions in appropriate moments. So that obviously comes with a really strong understanding of the concept of advantage. In general, we want our players to be playmakers and not play runners. We want all 5 players on the floor to be involved. Like at this level, we've generally got pretty high caliber players across the board. We want to have a little bit more equal opportunity with how we approach things. And then in the college setting, there is a component of understanding the concept of that there's winning involved and there's also development involved, whether that be across the 4 years or turning them into pros so they can play WNBL for Flynn in the future or whatever that kind of looks like. So I've got some visuals just to the right here in terms of kind of common language that we use. So the dominoes expression kind of refers to the concept of advantage and trying to keep the advantage as we go. We've got the volcano just there, which kind of talks about the lava. We call the inside the 3-point line the lava. We want great spacing. Once people enter that area, we want them to get out of that area pretty quickly. And then the other concept that we really try to instill in our players is that they want to try to put the defense in a blender. So those are kind of the initial offensive fundamentals. Inherent to all of this is we want to be a program that gives our players the keys. So we don't want to be someone who from the sideline is kind of trying to be a puppet master, these kind of things. We want to give our players the keys. We obviously want to equip them through practice to be able to do that, but we want to be kind of spectators in most of the offensive side of the ball. We feel that leads to kind of more connectivity between the transition phase of the game, the regular offense, and then the play after the play piece. So just some more kind of offensive fundamentals to touch on is that kind of spacing is key. Got to have locations for all kind of areas on the floor, and that they have really specific meaning to the players. At their core, the players need to understand the principles of how to move when the ball moves. So penetration receiver spots, and then in addition to that, if we have an advantage that has disappeared, how do we get back into a flow of things again? Probably the most important component is that if you have an advantage, you keep it. And if you don't, we need to create one. And kind of today's talk is a little bit about how to create those advantages in the first place. It's important to kind of equip the players to understand what types of advantages there can be. So obviously there can be numbers advantages. Those usually happen in a transition type setting. There may be long closeouts. That's something we really emphasize with our team, is how to create long closeouts and how to play off the catch in those situations that we maximize that advantage. There'd be some can't guard use. So maybe there was a switch and we need to punish that. Maybe you just have a great matchup and we can use your individual skills to do that. Pace could be an advantage. Okay, so moving into things seamlessly and kind of what we feel is that at our level, the surprise component isn't really a thing. So teams have 3 assistant coaches, a head coach, that are all preparing for your game. There's very little that you're going to surprise them with. And so developing the understanding that it's not about surprising someone, it's making appropriate choices based on what hand was dealt is kind of the most important thing. So I'm going to touch mostly today on kind of what we call our swing offense and kind of the number system behind that. That would be, in essence, how we try to create advantages. When I refer to kind of fires, smokes, and gets today, fires are anything that would be considered a dribble handoff, smokes are wing ball screens, and then gets are kind of the traditional term of gets, where it's the throw and go type component. So with that, I'm going to kind of show a little bit of of kind of the play after the play piece first. So let's kind of get to this. So we're going to go into the domino stuff. Reece, just let me know if the film isn't great as we go through this, but we'll see how we go. So firstly, kind of the play after the play, just to understand what we're trying to get to ultimately with this stuff. So here's a little action we run.
That's not coming up.
It's good?
No, it's not on the screen for us.
Oh, it's not? Okay, let me see.
Not yet.
Okay. All right. How about now?
Yeah, got that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So here we got a little action right now to get us into something. We've got this big double gap that we've created. So we're trying to create some of these drive kick scenarios here, making good choices on help. Okay, whack for these threes. Here we got a little ball screen action. Okay, making good choices. That's Cassidy Gould, Victorian girl, made that pass. Here, another type of scenario. That's two Aussies involved in that ball screen. Drive kick. So when I talk about play after the play, it's some of those decisions in terms of we've created that advantage. Okay, we've made a play out of it. Here, playing off a long closeout now. Okay, being able to attack that. More versions of attacking closeouts. Here, ran a little action. Attacking another long closeout. Boom, getting downhill. Really dynamic, making really quick choices, kind of as was mentioned earlier. Here, a little action. We've got a misdirection. Attack that long closeout as well. And here's a concept of kind of putting them in a blender. So kind of look here at this kid in particular at the top of the key, kind of spinning around, losing herself. He's Cascold hitting another three. That's kind of what we want things to look like. We want the defense to be very, very scattered. And some of these are very good defensive teams. This VCU team was exceptional defensive team that we kind of were able to look silly at some point. And here's kind of a little bit more out of the flow version of getting into this action. Here, a little drive kick. Okay, playing off that catch, making a pass, getting out of the lava there. And I think the big piece that we really rely on is the celebrating the intent piece. So it's not always about the result at the end of things, but celebrating the intent of, okay, did we attack our advantage? Did we keep our advantage? Did our shot come from those advantages being the important thing, and playing in an unselfish manner? So that kind of moves me along to kind of our swing offense. So that's kind of the end goal in terms of being able to play out of those spaces. So what I'm not going to go through today is how we get into things from a transition standpoint. If we get to the end and we've got extra time, I'll kind of show a little bit of that. But wanted to get into enough of the meat of kind of what makes our offense maybe different to what you maybe traditionally see. So probably traditional flow spacing of kind of having two wings in this type of scenario. We call them our hit spots. Now within our offense, anyone can fill any of these spots. Now, typically kind of what you would think of as maybe the 4 and the 5 would fill these middle of the floor spots. But within our transition, depending on who's kind of triggered it, what that looks like, these could be different people. But we call these our hit spots. We have our fly posts because they're flying down the floor. We have our trail post, and then we have a corner guard in these scenarios. So those are our spacing points. We find those spacing points once we have no advantage. And that usually happens pretty seamlessly. And after a few weeks of practice, we get to a point where our players feel pretty good about finding those locations and going from there. In general, kind of want this hit card on the 2 side to be a little lower than maybe would traditionally happen, giving space for this trail spot to really be able to play through that middle cylinder of the floor. So that brings me to kind of what we consider our swing offense. So I'm going to talk about 3 different components of offense today, and kind of how they interact in a way that leads to kind of our overall offensive system. So the first part is that we use a number system with our actions. So 85–90% of what we do comes out of this flow structure, and the keys are with the players. So while there are things we can give them going into a game and say, hey, we want to run this, we want to run this, we want to run this, maybe it's in a timeout, we specifically want to run this next. But in general, the players have the keys, okay? So what's involved is our players have a series of numbers that they can call to trigger a series of actions. And I'll go through who calls that number and how that works next. Following that, that's paired with a series of interactions. So there could be a number followed by an interaction. So that may be that we're running a 1 fire, so a fire being a dribble handoff. Now, there's different people that could be calling these things or what that looks like, and having them on the floor where they have a common communication plan on what that looks like leads to everyone on the floor being able to work off each other a little better and not being kind of kept in the dark. So each number has obviously a series of reads and counters to make from that as well. But we also have an ability to have some different counters to get us to the formations. So maybe there's teams that are like, hey, Davidson really likes to play through their trail spot. We're going to deny that. I would say I would call the next bracket of thing being counters for us to get to formation or for us to get into offense a little bit more seamlessly. Okay, so from this, here's kind of our same shot we just saw before for us to talk about kind of how offense is called and what this looks like. So the ball's probably floating down. It's probably somehow got into number 14 Caskill's hands over here and then reversed to this trail spot. So when the ball gets to this trail spot, this kind of almost triggers our offense in a way. So when the ball gets here, number 1 in this case is our kind of opposite hit guard. They are responsible for calling the next series of our offense. So kind of it was mentioned earlier about having the ability to tailor the offense based on individual players. This is a way that individual strengths can be accounted for. So a player may have a series of numbers that really suits their game. So maybe Katie's really good if she gets to call 8 because then it gets her into a series of different things. So her developing an understanding of, firstly, who's passing her the ball, who she is, and who's in the corner is an important part of the process. So at this point, Katie, number 1, would call a number, and then a series of things would happen. Okay, so that would be the first side. So we would call that first side of offense. As things continue on, if we got nothing out of that first side of action, that 3-side or 2-side action, the ball would then reverse to a rising big in the trail spot, and then the exact same thing would happen on the other side of the floor. So Cass, number 14, would be the hit guard in that spot that would be responsible for a call. In that case, she would make some kind of call as it relates to what she would do. So often we're running things pretty dynamically on the first side into maybe something that's a little bit more deliberate on the second side of the floor. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of talk through a series of kind of the video with this as it relates to these offensive pieces. So I've broken it down. I kind of struggled a little bit on how to break it down best. So what I've done is I'm going to start with the interaction-based stuff first. So this may be a little counterintuitive in terms of, we kind of mentioned before the numbers being the component, but I'm going to kind of go through this now. So interaction-based. So here's the exact clip we kind of saw in this version earlier. So here in this scenario, Rosie's got the ball, WA kid. Katie's now calling a number. You can usually tell when she's calling a number, boom. Now she's going to make a play. She's going to cut through. Here's the more traditional kind of flow, dribble handoff, and then big rising scenarios. So now this has happened. We now have another number to be called. So this would be Cass in this scenario calling this number. She called a ball screen and then happened. Okay, we now get some action out of that. So what this allows for is just a more consistent flow of offense while having an ability to have enough variety in things and have the keys with the players. So here, ball moves to the corner now. Okay, we have some action where we set a flare screen with this, and then this is kind of a combo action. So we're kind of a flare into a ball screen. Ball moves to the other side. Number 2 would have then called a number. She's able to get downhill in this ball screen, go finish at the rim. So things just kind of tend to move relatively seamlessly. Here, another example. So things aren't always going to get into offense as smoothly as you would like. Okay, here, kind of a transition scenario culminated in the ball getting on the top. We've gone in this, we set a ball screen, didn't get too much out of that. Here we go, move again, set that flare, and now we have this combo action where we're able to get downhill. Once again, not everything's going to go perfectly, but I wanted to kind of show the fluidity of how things can happen with this approach. I was really pleased that Flynn talked about the low post. I've got enough time. I'm going to get to that again. I completely agree with what he said earlier about kind of playing with our butt to the baseline and playing out of that. In this system, we feel like it's just so important that low post is recognized and that we play through that a lot. So we call that playing through the fly post. And unless we're able to establish the fly post by throwing it in there and making plays from there, makes our offense really difficult to kind of have the fluidity that we want. What we want to create, people really sagging in and creating some of those long closeouts that we can then kind of play out of. So here, this is kind of just a simple kind of ball screen example with spacing. And what I wanted to show is there's obviously different wrinkles to how this would be approached from a game-to-game basis. So defensive coverages are going to be very different. In the span of a college basketball season, or I'll put it this way. So because the 24-second shot clock in kind of international basketball and Australia stuff and just the consistency, a little bit of coach development and how that works, the style of basketball is probably pretty homogenous in the environment that you guys are used to. With us having a 30-second shot clock, bunch of coaches, range of ages, and different approaches to things, different styles from different areas of the country, all of that across the 351 teams in college basketball, we see a wide variety of kind of styles of play. And that in particular goes on the defensive end. It's on the offensive end too, but on the defensive end across the course of the season, we're going to see pretty much everything that anyone could do on a basketball court. So because of that, having a system that is pretty malleable to be able to make the most of different mini choices that teams are going to make is really, really important. And once again, that comes back to our language of saying, okay, well, if we're in a game, we're having to make X adjustment, how do we then communicate what those kind of mini reads or mini adjustments are going to be? So in this example, we rise our big early. Sometimes that if they're kind of heavy in help, we would be flaring this outside kid. But here we're rising early, manipulating what their help is. Teams know that we like to kind of really penetrate and pitch, so they tend to move towards theirs a little bit once we get action going. Here we are able to play out of that ball screen stuff. Here, kind of seeing a little bit more seamlessly, we're running action. It's a different one of our numbers. Here, there's a little bit of an ice that goes on in terms of this team. Okay, our players understanding how to move off these things and how to play in a variety of concepts are really important. Here, same kind of ball screen stuff. Now we see a switch. Okay, our players recognizing early that they're switching. What we need to do now is just space out of this. Okay, and be able to isolate Adelaide Fuller, Strand Girl on the low block. Here we go. Ball goes in there. We're able to punish that switch, punish them for that coverage. Here's kind of our smash option. So in this example, this might be appropriate in kind of hard hedge type variety stuff. You see here, kind of soft show. We're able to then seal our backside. We've got an early rise with this scenario. Able to get there. So you notice there's lots of little tweaks that can happen, but what the consistent components are is who calls plays, how it happens, and our locations on the floor are kind of the essential pieces. Got a nice high-low there. And then the last kind of interaction component is kind of this kind of 8-get mindset. So here we're running our flare screen action. Didn't get great action out of that flare screen. Don't love that she's so high. But once again, our ability to handle kind of not perfect components with our offense, I think is pretty good. Here they make the choice to go under that get. We're able to then shoot behind it. I'm going to stop there for a second. Reece, is there any questions that have popped up so far?
Just one. Do you think the number system makes it easier, or does it sort of take them some time to adjust to in terms of learning that system, possibly as opposed to just having the couple of actions and then playing? So, yeah, how much do you think that makes, I guess, positive improvement, and how quickly does that happen?
So I think the thing that's really helpful in that way is, once again, you're not throwing all numbers in at once. So we may start our very base part of the season with giving kids an option of being in ones or threes, for example, and understanding the components of that. Probably the thing that takes a little bit of time is players feeling comfortable with the onus being on them to make a decision. So often the first kind of weeks or months within our program, particularly players that haven't come from maybe motion-based systems where they've had to make a lot of choices, they often get caught like calling one number very consistently. It's what's locked in their mind. They're like, I know I'm in the spot. I know the responsibility's on me now. One. And it's like, all right, they just go through, and that's fine if that's what their comfort level is. But I think the goal of this is over the course of the season, we get better. Over the course of one's career, they get better. And they can also tailor their skill set or tailor their number calling on what they're working on on the side, all of those kind of things that can go into. So I like the clarity of it. Like a lot of teams would have kind of names for actions or whatever. Like I think the number thing where it's very simple. It's 1 through 10, generally one syllable type stuff where they can communicate that quickly. And they can be thinking about what that number is pretty early on. So when the ball's on the opposite side of the floor, they could be assessing what's going on, where things are at, maybe what worked on the previous possession, processing some of those things, and then making plays out of that. Now, in theory, you could in some way do it without the numbers, but we feel like the ability for everyone to communicate with each other was really important early days for our trail post to be able to understand what options may be available to them. So then being able to kind of see the play a little bit ahead of it happening, being able to see what the options might be. Okay, like, is this going to be a slip scenario where we might be able to find a kid going to the hoop? Like, it just kind of makes things go a little bit more seamlessly, I would think. And yeah, there's some moments where there's a little bit of lag, but our goal is to move to kind of lag-free offense as things go along. Did I answer that question, Reece?
No, it's fantastic.
All right. So I'm going to jump into kind of the numbers-based piece next, and we'll kind of go through this. So here's kind of probably the more traditional kind of like ball screen motion type setup, but I wanted to show kind of like really the base example of what this looks like. So here is kind of ball screen on one side of the floor. Okay, we have an early rise in this situation. And then what we're trying to create is we're trying to really manipulate help on the backside of the floor. So making things really difficult for this kid that's got their head on the rim to do things. So maybe that comes out of the pace piece that we spoke about in the creating advantages. So didn't get a whole lot out of that ball screen. They jammed and undered on that one. Okay, but we went there and this kid still gets caught in help. So our ability to now 3-screen on this side creates this 3 on an open side of the floor, all because we had this action on the first side of the floor. So our players' ability to understand the connectivity between two sides of the floor is really important, probably the first thing that we do in addition to stuff. Here's an example of kind of slipping in the space now. So here was our kind of 8. They're in like a switching component now. They get a bit confused. We're able to play from there. The ability to connect things together. Once again, all this is just one number that dictates a lot of these different pieces that have happened that are reads. This is one of my favorite actions that we have. So what we find is teams do probably one of two things in the trail spot against a kind of flow type based team. Either they try to deny very heavily, in which case they're trying to stop the ball reversing and try to stop us getting into our number series on the other side of the floor, or they end up sagging that big and trying to disrespect the big a little bit in that spot. So here is a situation, we'll talk about this in the counters in a sec, but they're denying our kind of hit guard spot. Okay, a counter would be what we would call kind of our no action, where we exchange. Okay, we make this movement. Now we're in the same kind of thing. Now Chloe, number 2 here, that's just risen up into the hit spot, is able to call her number. Go to the corner in this, and now we're screening in from that spot there. We find that's really, really good. Both if there was denial in the trail area here as well, we can run this, or if they're sagging off too. So there's Adelaide kind of hitting that 3. Here's kind of our kind of best version of what our flaring action would look like. So here we call a number. We're able to come in with that trail spot. We've got action going on the other side of the floor while this is going on. We're able to shoot behind that 3. That poor one kid's copped it a little bit in this film. here would be kind of the same kind of action we saw before with the screening to the trail post. And they're curling in here, and we're looking to kind of create this double gap drive in this scenario, really being able to be in drive kick, finish at the rim. And I think one thing to understand is in terms of our rationale for doing a lot of this, seen a lot of the flow stuff and really liked it. And I was down at kind of under 16 nationals, maybe last year and the year before, and saw a lot of the state programs running flow type stuff. And I think the one thing that at our level is really important is the variety of what that looks like. So we'll play with pace and get into the kind of dribble at kind of handoff action. But if we do that, the second side will always be something else. And part of that is creating a bit of a perturbation of the defense, okay, playing with pace, getting through things with fluidity. But having variety, that they're not guarding the same action over is really, really important. And we can make people run pretty well through that approach. So here we've kind of got a little top handoff that we do as well. This is the kind of one you saw earlier. They kind of switched on that one. And now we're able to kind of play out of that. They switch. Now, like a little confusion on the closeout. Now we're spaced. We have 3 players spotting up, ready for drive kick. One more examples. Here we're able to kind of go whack from that. Then we're going to talk about counters a little bit. So have a variety of ways we could counter things where teams really try to take us out of that. So here would just be a counter as it relates to kind of the top denial. So teams, this is our number spot. They maybe start getting a hang of the fact that we're calling numbers in that spot. Okay. Now a number might be that she exits, right? So a 1 might be that she cuts all the way through the other side. It doesn't involve her having to necessarily be the one receiving this ball. So here we're in this. She actually goes with a no. So trying to run some high numbered things involving 3 people on a side. Now we're into this ball screen. Okay, and you can see on this side of the floor too, we saw examples of early rises. Here we're really trying to keep this backside accountable. So here we're kind of trying to flare that backside, keep them accountable, able to kind of find that pick and roll. We can see that one again real quick. So see there's like multiple components of this. We got great spacing, I would say, in general. For the most part, we got 4 around the perimeter and 1 inside on most things. Okay, so here you can see the other example, right? So teams really trying to stop us getting the ball to this trail spot and getting into offense because they know that we're pretty dangerous once we get to play with some fluidity. They're doing a pretty good job. There's a big girl down here doing a pretty nice job pushing our post player out of the area. She wants to catch it. So what we can do from here is we'll run this hit screen. So just running a ball screen at that baseline ball screen. Everyone else is kind of obviously in hugged up mode. We're able to play from there. 2 Aussies again playing together, able to kind of make that work. Kind of here would be an example of kind of the same kind of thing where we're going into a hit. Initially, they're very spread out on this side of the floor. Let's play a little 2-man game over here. Okay, now we're able to play off this. And I think this was the thing I really like about this one is it really highlights that we equip every one of our kids to be able to be in a play off the catch mindset or an advantage mindset. So here's 6'3" post player, Adelaide, who's now able to pop to the 3. She's closed out pretty hard. Now here she's able to play off the catch. She would have had a drive kick there as well. She felt pretty confident about her ability to go finish that. And then another example of kind of these counters, team switching a lot, would be our ability to just slip into space. So here we're moving, kind of making teams have trouble with what's going on, able to make plays out of that piece. So that's kind of the general premise behind all of that. I'm happy to jump into questions, and I got some more film I can show if kind of questions go in those directions. So what you got, Reece?
Coach, just one around. I think you said something around 80 or 95, 85 to 90% of the time that's your action. What if you get zoned? Does your zone offense look completely different, or do you still stay within some of that and just screen the zone? What's sort of the philosophy there?
Yeah, so we've gone 2 different ways with that at times. So depending on our group, over the course of the last 3 years, we'd use more or less of that. So often what we would do is our offense would start in that way, but maybe after the first number was called, and we're able to create an advantage or something was able to happen out of that, then we may move into just more traditional zone principles after that. So maybe getting 2 posts in there, getting a high-low, getting people around the elbow, around what we would call kind of the A10 area against zones. So I would say probably against a zone, we use a little bit more kind of traditional zone offense. And then the other thing, we obviously have play calls as it relates to some different formations around that. So that would be the 15%, but probably 60% of our offense would be the players totally having the keys with that stuff. And maybe 15 to 20% where we really dictate, hey, we'd love you to run a 1 into a 6 to get this kind of look, would be the other way of that happening. Now, the way that it functionally works is that going into most games, we're going to say, hey, like for the start of this game, we know they're going to probably do this. Let's really focus on 8, 9s, and 10s to start this game. It's not like they're usually just picking from a whole assortment of what that looks like. So that way there's a little bit more seamless understanding what's going to happen. And they're able to just kind of flow into things a little easier.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that. What about that loaded side type spacing and things? How do you teach that? Is it through 3-on-3 breakdowns? How are you getting to play those different reads so they get good at them?
Yeah, so for the most part, a huge chunk of our offensive practices or parts of our practice involve just 3 players. So, and we didn't see some great examples of that. We did see some decent examples with some of the ball screen stuff, but our goal is for each of those actions to be able to score, like create an advantage, or to create a score out of it. And as we're going, we're obviously getting better at doing some of this. But most of our kind of practice would involve probably a coach in the spot Cass is over here, or a player just triggering it with no kind of defense. Offense, and then defense. So kind of 3 people. So we may just be working on, say, 3 smoke actions. So that would be maybe a down screen, exit out the other side into a ball screen type action. But we would just play out of that 3v3 stuff constantly. And so it's 3v3 live once we kind of call that number. But there are the constraints of, hey, like, let's get this. Let's really try to get stuff mostly on the one side of the floor if we can. Now, if we're in something where this player ends up on the other side, we can be in drive kick and play out of that and be able to make the play after the play. But yeah, that's kind of how we practice it most, is very much out of 3-on-3 in that setting. And what we'll do is whether it be coaches involved playing defense as well, or our scout guys, we'll often dictate what the defense is going to do to make them make certain reads out of that. So it may be like, hey, let's really make it very, very difficult to catch in that hit spot just there. So maybe she has all intents and purposes to call an 8, but we're denying that catch and the ball can't get there. Well, she then has to make her counter to then allow us to get into that next action. So we'll kind of do that. We'll also kind of like have deliberate plans on where the defense would break down, so they have to see certain reads as well. So maybe that's a couple of coaches in there that are switching poorly, or some of these things for us to be able to just see that stuff.
Yeah, awesome. That's all we've got through at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'll do, I'm gonna show our post play a little, because I think that's a question that pops up a little bit with coaches, is just kind of whether kind of post play is dead or how that's approached. But I mentioned earlier about how important it is for us to have like good spacing and keep people accountable on the defensive end. So here's what we would consider like kind of our fly post spot just here. As Coach mentioned earlier, we're a little bit more of the mindset that we want to be able to establish a position and catch the ball with our butt to the baseline. Now, we have a different lane size than you guys down there. We really honestly don't care where they catch down here, as long as they catch and are able to establish stuff. And we can have off-ball movement upon these catches, but in this post area, we really want to be able to play out of that spot, And once again, there's movement going on as this is going on this post entry. In these cases, we're able to really get finishes kind of at the front of the rim. Here, we're able to kind of cut into space. We've got great spacing here. Like to hunt that middle area of the floor. Now, here's an example, slightly smaller kind of post player in this spot. Our ability to just catch in this space and play. So the rules in the college game and really the rules internationally have kind of moved a little bit towards kind of a little bit more freedom of movement and allowing defenders a little bit less leeway into the arm bars and those kind of things. And so rules in the college game right now is once you turn and face in this setting, you become a guard, essentially. So they are not allowed to put an arm bar on. They're not allowed to put two hands on. The second they touch you twice, that would be considered a foul. So we like our players to play in this space a lot. You've seen Katie. She would have been our trigger in our offense to kind of start that, get through to the corner. We've got good spacing. We're ready to shoot the ball. But here we're able to kind of just attack there, get to the hoop. Here, same thing. Sarah likes to play off in this spot, likes to use her speed a little more. Got great stuff. We do tag up as well, so you'll see in all these clips, all of our players are moving forward. And then here, once again, because we have an ability, we have great spacing, and we have great ability to play off the catch after this. Very rarely are they sending double teams in these scenarios. Now, she's going to score almost every time that they don't do that. So our ability to kind of establish that from the start and make teams start collapsing a little more, really, really important. Here, kind of some of these counters, play from there. Let's see what else we got in that segment. And then the last piece is, once again, we're totally fine with them stepping kind of off to the perimeter a little more. So this kind of spacing here, putting her on an island, we can kind of screen away in these scenarios, but just making it really difficult to isolate that player, we believe is part of it. Now, the last piece of it is kind of the shooting of the ball. So we feel that's a shot that most post players can make at a really high clip. What we do, so once again, the hands are down in this scenario, even if they're not, that's a great area for us to catch the ball and be able to shoot it. And the last thing, obviously, is if high siding, they try to stop us doing that because we're just having a lot of success with it. We can obviously be in kind of seal score type scenarios. So you know what? I'm going to stop there in terms of kind of the presentation piece, and I'm happy to go any direction you want to go with questions.
Thanks so much for that, James. It was awesome stuff. I've got two coaches that are going to ask a question. I'll first go to you, Mason, just to ask your question.
Thanks, Coach, for that. I was just wondering, watching the clips, how much of your shot select, or I guess, do you determine your shot selection more on analytics and statistics, or are you more looking for open shots within the offense? That might be a bit of a
Yeah, so I think in general, like we're kind of going to prioritize like threes and layups, like as a real priority. So that would come from trying to get heat on the rim, and some of the principles that were spoken earlier in terms of like principles of good offense absolutely apply. So if we want to heat on the rim, we feel like a 1v1 fly post catch is really, really good heat on the rim. Creating drive kick scenarios so we get open threes are really important. And I think the one thing I probably didn't talk about as much is just every one of our kids has the license to be able to shoot the ball when they're open. So I think that's a really important piece. We've put a lot of effort in equipping our players to be able to do that. They have the facilities to do so, to get in the gym and shoot as much as they need to prepare them for that. So if we create a drive kick and that's an open catch, we want to be able to shoot that ball. I think some of the lower percentage shots you would maybe see in some different offenses, whether that be contested pull-ups and that kind of thing, just don't really happen in what we do because of how our spacing originates and how a lot of our shots kind of occur. So I would say there's an element of like analytics with regards to like, hey, these are analytically the best shots to take, but open threes, things at the rim, things that have originated from advantage is probably how we evaluate a good shot or not.
All right, thank you, Coach.
Yeah, no problem.
And Claire Knight's got a question, not so much on offense, more broadly.
Okay.
Hey, Coach, thank you so much for sharing all your stuff. So just a general question, like with things the way that they are at the moment in the world and everybody's sort of shut down basketball wise, what are you guys doing with your players? Like are all your Aussie girls home? Are they expected to return at a particular time, or, you know, sort of how are things sitting for you guys?
Yeah, so Davidson's a little unique as it is anyway. So we're a pretty high academic school, and so the load for our kids through a normal college year is pretty high, both regards to basketball and kind of the academic piece. And so we actually more typically don't have summer school here for that reason, and to allow kids to have internships and spend time at home and that kind of thing across the summer months. So in some way, this period right now is not that different to what it would normally be for us with that regard. Now, probably access to facilities and some of that stuff is really different. But I think kind of how we approach stuff at Davidson is that that the summer we try to leave our kids a little bit more alone. We obviously have regular touches with them, regular conversations about what they need to be working on as that goes. But they're a little bit more to their own devices. Now, part of that plays into the NCAA rules too. So the NCAA says we're only allowed if our kids were to be on campus right now. And we're actually, because of this year, this doesn't necessarily apply, but a normal year, they're on campus through these summer months. We're only allowed to work with them on court 4 hours a week. So that's all we're technically allowed to do with them. So kind of my philosophy, like particularly with our Australian kids, is like their ability to get home and be able to kind of be coached by some of the people they've been coached by before, whether that be their representative coaches or state coaches or high performance people, whatever that looks like. To me, that's almost better for their development than spending 12 months in the cauldron of what we do. Like I think that broadens kind of how their basketball looks. Once again, our goal is to create players that play at the next level as well, and their ability to translate what they learned here into things that happen in that environment is important. And I think the secondary piece to that is we really want our players kind of giving back to the communities they came from. And so I know Cass kind of been working out a little bit with some groups down there, and having the ability of a 15-year-old kid to be in a workout with Cass and see how hard she works and some of those things. Like I think that piece is really important than kind of the selfish nature of having her here. So that's how that works. So we intend for them to come back in August. We're still waiting on an announcement on kind of start date for school. But as far as we're aware, as things currently stand, the college basketball season is going to be as normal. And so, yeah, our group will return in August. So pretty excited for that to be the case.
Yeah, and have sort of restrictions impacted how you're recruiting at the moment too?
Yeah, so we were fortunate in a way with our 2020 class that just came in, or that's coming in. We were kind of done with that really early, but it absolutely has. So we normally kind of the months of April through July are very, very heavy evaluation periods from a recruiting standpoint. So I tend to go to under 16 Australian national championships every year. That's kind of my version down there. But the AU scene over here, or the club basketball scene, there's periods in April, May, and July that are really heavy. So it definitely has impacted it. I think it's for American kids for the 2021 class. That's the group that are kind of being recruited right now. Probably doesn't have as much of an impact. It probably impacts the 22s and 23s a little more.
Yeah.
And then for the international kids, it's definitely played a role. And I think the one thing that, as an academic school, that has almost hurt us more with the recruiting piece is just the SAT tests had been canceled. So our ability to get a really good evaluation of maybe where some of our the people we'd identified sit from an academic standpoint has been a problem. So so they're going to resume in August. So we're kind of in some ways sitting on our hands a little bit on some of those kids until we get to that point. So definitely been tricky, and obviously coaches have had to really reevaluate or take stock of how they approach things anyway.
Cool. Thanks. Well, all the best.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's it for the questions that have come through so far, Coach.
Okay.
If you want to wrap it up.
Yeah. So I think obviously that was really just an insight into kind of that swing stuff, and I've spoken to Reece a couple of weeks ago, and I guess how we approach things a little bit different than how most people do. So went through that. I will say I did a presentation for Basketball New South Wales a couple of weeks ago. I believe that's online, and that's kind of more about how we approach implementing some of this into our practices. Anyone that's got any questions at any point can reach out. My email's here. Can hit me up on Twitter. That's no problem. Happy to answer any questions you got, whether it's what we spoke about today, about college basketball in general, whatever. I'm available. And then I do try to get down to Australia once or twice every year. Obviously, right now I'm not able to, but when I'm down there, and happy to connect in future. So, and I'm happy to stick around if people have more questions too, Reece. It's 7 in the morning. I don't know what to be.
No, I appreciate your time very much. I'll just stop your screen sharing just for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate the detail. I will end the recording in 1 second. Then if anyone wants to stay on and ask questions directly, I'll allow that. But I just want to flag, we're having our last online clinic next week. And we've got Brendan Joyce, who's going to present on his style of play, his conceptual motion, and some defensive, pressure defense and pack defense concepts. So really lucky one to finish off on. We're going a little bit earlier, 6:45, to try and avoid the clash with the football, which James pointed out to me. I didn't really think about that. So I appreciate the guy over in America making sure he pointed out the AFL is kind of a big thing, but you got to understand I'm from New South Wales, so I don't think about those things. So, but appreciate everyone tuning in, and I look forward to having our last online clinic next week before we can get back in the stadiums the week after.